I've never taken one.
It's your life.
Yeah, first story.
Just, yeah. I need to shake it.
What's your?
He is, yeah. We tried to get it back, but one of them figured that there were. That's a good one. I'm Marcus, by the way. Marcus? What do I study? Oh, good, yeah. Well, we use yours then. I don't want to, I probably should really should look into this.
Ron, you know, stuck out there. Said you haven't noticed
What do you do, like a half month for this month?
what?
Do a half month for this month? Why'd you put it off? Why'd you put it off?
Why did I put this?
Moving it up.
I only find these to be on the month, but I like
Yeah, there you go. Good. Awesome. Just like this? No.
sorry about starting late. Sorry about the pizza being late. Hope you enjoy it and the other food that was out there. Our speaker today is Brian Morris. He's a primary certified instructor of Polygraph with the American Polygraph Association, one of only a handful of people in the country to hold that certification. He's approved examiner in many different states, and he's also a licensed examiner, so he teaches Polygraph and also administers them. He has his JD from the University of Idaho. Unlike most of our speakers, I'm not really exactly sure what he's going to talk about or what he's going to do, so I'm just going to stop talking and turn it over to him and let him take over. Welcome. And please.
Okay, well, with Polygraph, there's a lot of things we can talk about, and I'm sure you're going to have plenty of questions when we get to that. But I want to give you a good broad overview where you as future attorneys are probably going to have most of your exposure to Polygraph. Now, as a Polygraph examiner, I'm working in 6 different states. I work in California, Washington, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and Utah. Of those states, only Utah is a state licensing state. The other 5 states, they don't have any state licensing requirements, so if you're working in any state that has yellow, like Pennsylvania, it could be really difficult to know who a good polygraph examiner is because there's no state licensing. So I'm going to refer you to a website called polygraph.org. That's the American Polygraph Association website. It lists by name and by state everyone who has been certified by the American Polygraph Association as having met the basic requirements for membership. Now, Utah happens to be the toughest state in the country to get a license in, where I started doing polygraphs. Not only do we have the 400 in-class hours we have to do 2 state exams, we have to do a 1-year internship under an experienced examiner, and then to maintain our license every 2 years we have to do 60 hours of continuing education credits. That's double what I have to do as an attorney. It's tough to maintain a license, tough to get a license. That's why there's only 8 polygraph examiners who do post-conviction sex offender testing in Utah, and there's only 25 total examiners for the entire state. All right, law enforcement. This is most of where your exposure should be coming from, and there are 5 major types of exams that law enforcement does. There's pre-employment, counterintelligence, intelligence, specific issue, guilty knowledge, and internal affairs. Is everybody here former law enforcement or apply for a law enforcement job? Anybody looking to go federal government, CIA, FBI, Secret Service? Have you looked at the FS-86 form? Okay. The FS-86 form is highly invasive. You take your bar application and you'll probably double it. You're looking at 80 to 100 pages of material that you're having to submit as part of this background investigation for you. They want to know everything you've done since you were 2 years old and conscious. I mean, they're trying to find out about any theft from previous employers, illegal drug use, sex acts that would be considered criminal. This way they can make a good employment decision. And if they eliminated everybody who'd ever used illegal drugs in their entire life, they'd lose 3/4 of their applicants. What they want to find out is, were you smoking bud last week, not when you were in high school and doing stupid things. So recency is going to be important. And with this test, because we're trying to find out so much information, we're trying to hit 8, 10, 12 different targets on this polygraph exam. It's called a screening exam. We're trying to screen out bad applicants, people who are not going to be a good fit. The other key thing that we're trying to do is make sure we catch all the people who are lying to keep them out. So when we look at a normal bell curve distribution of people's reactions on a polygraph exam, we shift that bell curve so that the people who are lying fail 99+% of the time on the screening exam. Now, by shifting the bell curve, that's at the expense of people who are telling the truth. People who are telling the truth on a screening exam only pass 70 to 75% of the time. Now, most good jurisdictions realize that is a limitation of this type of test. And if you take the screening exam and they say you failed, and you go, you know what, I'm being completely truthful on the test, they'll follow up with a specific issue exam on whatever one narrow issue it is that you failed on. Now, a specific issue exam, it's not perfect, but it's anywhere between 87 and 98% accurate, depending on the testing technique that individual's using and the experience of the examiner. So if you come in and you take that pre-employment exam, you fail the test, it's 70 to 75% accurate at catching people telling the truth. You follow up with the specific issue exam that's 87 to 98% accurate, and you fail that test. And, you know, you tell them I'm being completely truthful. You know what? You don't get the job. That's a collateral damage that law enforcement and the federal government is absolutely willing to accept to make sure they are keeping all the people out who are lying on these particular tests. All right, counterintelligence intelligence. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of our country's national secrets, making sure that people who have top secret security clearance are not misusing this information, they're not associating with individuals that have interests that are counter to our country. Anybody know how many people hold a top secret security clearance right now in our country? Let me guess.
10,000.
A little more?
50,000.
800,000. 800,000 people hold top secret security clearance. That's a lot of people with a lot of access to information. And this particular report is down there at the bottom. This is the Department of Defense and their 7 agencies from May 2010 to April 2011. They ran over 43,000 internal exams just to make sure people were not doing things that they shouldn't be. Now, that does not include FBI, CIA, Secret Service, and those other agencies. There were well over 100,000 exams were run during that time frame. Now, this is all pre-Edward Snowden. Post-Edward Snowden, that number is probably going to quadruple. And when you get done with your law degree and you go out there and you decide, I want to get a job, and if you're going to go into the law field, you're going to be competing with probably about 3 million other attorneys. The federal government is absolutely hiring for polygraph examiners because they're quadrupling their workload. And when you come out with a Juris Doctor, you're going to be about G12 on the employment scale, which is a pretty good paying job, and then you'd only be competing with about 4,500 people in the country. Okay, specific issue. This is really the quintessential polygraph exam that most people are going to think of when they think of a polygraph. It's, did you do X? Did you rob the bank? Did you steal the car? Did you manufacture the drugs? One narrow issue. Because we're only trying to hit one target instead of 8, 10, 12 targets the way that we do on a screening exam, this is our most highly accurate standard polygraph exam. Again, 87 to 98% accurate. Now, most of the time what we're going to do is we're going to identify our prime suspect and we're going to ask him, will you come and take a polygraph exam? If that person says no, well, law enforcement can't stop investigating that particular crime. And what's nice is most criminals are not Ted Kaczynski. They're not living in Montana in a cabin, writing manifestos, mailing pipe bombs, and not associating with anybody. Most criminals have friends. They like to talk to their friends. In fact, a lot of times they like to brag to their friends. So Jimmy is the guy who robbed the local 7-Eleven, and he's hanging out with his buddy Billy and says, hey Billy, you know what? We need a new Xbox game. Here's $200. Go buy Grand Theft Auto 5, go get us some good pizza. And all of a sudden Billy goes, dude, where'd you get $200? You don't even have a job. And Jimmy goes, oh, yeah, you know that 7-Eleven thing we saw last week on the news? Yeah, I did that. And all of a sudden Billy has what we call guilty knowledge. He knows who robbed the 7-Eleven. Jimmy just told him. And he now has some of the proceeds of that particular robbery. So if we can get Billy in there to take a polygraph exam, we can, again, try and break these cases. And give you an example of what I've been dealing with. Did my Juris Doctorate at the University of Idaho. And Northern Idaho is a whole bunch of small jurisdictions. They do not have large departments. They do not have on-staff, full-time polygraph examiners. So they're not used to dealing with polygraph very often. But because I deal with Department of Corrections and post-conviction sex offenders, the Lewiston Police Department, that was about 30 miles south of where I was at, found out I was around and called me and said, hey, we've got this particular case. Can you do a polygraph exam if we can get them to come in there? I'm like, sure. What's the setup of this case? Well, this particular incident, it was a senior citizen. He had 200 oxycodone pills that had been stolen from his house. These were big 120s. They were grindable, smokable. Street value in Lewiston, Idaho was $200 per pill. That's $40,000 worth of prescription medication floating around down there. And the Lewiston Police Department had investigated this case for more than 30 days. They had more than 500 man-hours investigating this crime. You think about what a detective makes, they make between $20 and $30 an hour depending on the jurisdiction. That's $10,000 to $15,000 worth of taxpayer money that they had invested in this investigation. And the only suspect they'd had after 30 days and 500 man-hours was the caregiver for this senior citizen. So they call her up and ask her, will you come in and take a polygraph? She says no. So they call me back and say, I guess we're off. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Who are her known associates? And they're like, well, she's married. I'm like, perfect. Husband's a great person to get in there if he can come in. And then we find out the husband, he's on probation. And in the great state of Idaho, when you're on probation, you are required, as part of your probation contract, to take any and all tests that your probation officer requested you. And if you refuse, you are in violation of your contract, and you're going away on a 6 to 12 month rider of incarceration. This guy didn't want to spend Christmas incarcerated, and so he agrees to come in and take the polygraph. And we give him a guilty knowledge test, and we asked him, did you steal the missing prescription medication? Do you know for sure who stole the missing prescription medications? Do you know where any of those missing prescription medications are right now? The question he failed is, do you know for sure who stole any of those missing prescription medications? Well, we talked with his PO real quick before we did his post-test interrogation. We were pretty sure he was going to be identifying his wife, since she was the only person that they had as a suspect in this case. We get him in there, and we say, all right, obviously you know who stole that missing prescription medication. What happened? He's like, well, you know, everybody thinks it was my wife, but that's not what happened. Okay, what did happen? Like, well, about a week before this incident, we were at a party. We got introduced to this guy, and we started talking about work. And my wife mentions that she's a caregiver. And all of a sudden, this guy gets really interested in what a caregiver does. He's like, what do you have to do? Well, I have to cook, I have to clean, I have to take him to his doctor's appointments. Really? How often do you have to take him to the doctor? Every Friday, we're gone all afternoon. He's got like 6 specialists that he's got to see all the time. Okay, what else do you have to do? Well, I have to bathe him, I have to give him his medications. Really? What kind of medications do you have to give him? Well, he's got blood pressure, cholesterol, pain medications. And the red light went off for this guy. He had pumped this poor woman for information, found out when she was out of the house, what medications were in the house, and the very next Friday is when this incident occurred. Well, the person that this guy was identifying was nowhere on the police's radar. 30 days, 500 man-hours. Never heard of him. And this is obviously not enough to get a warrant, but it was certainly enough to go door knock this guy's house. They go over there Saturday morning, 7 a.m., knock on the door. Guy falls out of bed, hasn't had his morning coffee. He opens the door, he's like, hello. They're like, hi, we're from the Lewiston Police Department. Can we come in and talk to you? He's like, yeah, come on in. They walk in, plain view, coffee table, 180 oxycodone. That case got closed in under 48 hours. A polygraph exam cost him $250. Compare that with the $10,000 to $15,000 they've invested in their investigation. Every month, my 2L and 3L a year, I got calls for polygraph exams when they were about the 50-man-hour mark instead of the 500-man-hour mark, because they realized what a fantastic tool this could be for them in their investigations. All right, internal affairs. These are really the worst kind of exams we have to run as a polygraph examiner, but if we're going to do pre-employment, if we're going to do counterintelligence, if we're going to use it as part of our criminal investigations, we're certainly going to use it on our own people if there are allegations of wrongdoing. And you know, sometimes good people make some really bad choices. You can go to any state bar in the country and look at people's applications, and there are plenty of our colleagues who made some really dumb choices before they went to law school. Fortunately, they're not making them after, and if they are, they're the ones that we see getting disbarred. The same thing happens with law enforcement. Sometimes they put the badge on and they start making some bad choices. But we've got to make sure we got 2 things. Number 1, we want to make sure we have an unbiased test. And I'm not going to be testing the people that are in the jurisdictions that I regularly work in, because if I've been working with somebody for 5 or 10 years, I'm not going to be able to give them an unbiased test. Number 2, when you work for law enforcement, you work for, you know, these federal government agencies, the military, you're part of a team. You've got to be able to put your life in their hands, they've got to be able to put their life in your hands, and we cannot afford to damage that teamwork. And if I'm testing my own guys, even if they pass, they're going to be upset that I'm doing polygraph exams on them. So we're only going to do internal affairs exams for other jurisdictions that we don't regularly work at as part of the team. All right, so why is law enforcement using polygraph exams? Well, it comes down to one thing, money. Philadelphia cannot hire 50,000 detectives to investigate all crime at the level that they would like to be able to do it. They have limited budgets, limited resources, and they have to be able to allocate those resources the best ways that they possibly can to solve as many crimes as they possibly can, given their limited personnel. So how that's going to work is we're going to identify who our prime suspects are. We're going to ask them, will you come in and take a polygraph exam? If that person says no, well, unless they're on probation or something, they're perfectly within their rights. But for law enforcement, that is going to be an automatic red flag. We have to assume that that person was involved, and that's why they're choosing not to take the polygraph exam. And so we will continue to allocate resources to investigate that individual until we're able to, you know, at some point either clear them or find the things that are going to allow us to be able to, you know, arrest them. If this person comes in and they take the polygraph exam and they pass, well, that's not bad. Now we know, stop allocating all these resources to investigating this person. We're going to move them down our list. We'll move on to more likely suspects. And if we get through those suspects and get back to that original person who took the polygraph, Well, at least we know that we weren't allocating resources to somebody who was able to successfully pass the polygraph. And at least we're trying our best to, again, allocate those resources. Now, if this person comes in and they fail, that's fantastic. Now we get to interrogate that person. We get to find out what it is that they're hiding, what their involvement level was. And a lot of criminals, they think they're really good at lying to people, that they can get over on anybody that they're talking to. When you come in and you take a polygraph and you fail, many times that breaks their cycle of denial. They realize, oh man, the jig's up. They're going to get all up in my business. They're going to go, and my mom's going to find out, my girlfriend's going to find out, and I don't want that to happen. They just confess. And this is by far the biggest use of polygraph exam, is where we get people who come in, they fail, and they confess. And you as future attorneys, if you're going to be a prosecutor, you hope that you're working in a jurisdiction that has a fantastic polygraph program, and they bring you all kinds of confessions, because confessions mean convictions. And that's what DAs care about. They care about what their conviction rate is. I was driving through Nebraska at election time, and the ad on the radio was re-elected DA, 30 years experience, 97% conviction rate. No DA has a 97% conviction rate unless they are getting tons of confessions and then they are highly risk averse to trying cases. Yeah? What percentage of cases typically go to trial in criminal cases?
Less than 10.
Yeah, way less than 10. Usually it's about 2 to 4% of cases, depending on the jurisdiction. That means 96 to 98% of cases aren't even seeing a trial go to them. I mean, they're getting tons of plea agreements, or we're getting cases that end up getting dropped. So if we're only talking 2 to 4%, that means those are the really close ones. If you're dealing with really close cases and you're dealing with juries that have a lot of emotional things that are going on, prosecutors, when it actually goes to trial, are probably winning about 2/3 to 3/4 of those cases, maybe more depending on the jurisdiction. But they have a lot higher loss rate than 97% wins. You have to have a ton of confessions in order to kind of carry that thing. So that's what we're looking at in terms of how attorneys are using polygraphs. If you're the DA, you hope you're getting confessions. Now, if you are on the defense side of things, there are many things you can do with polygraph exam to be able to help your client. Number one, I'm sure all of us here, our clients go, I'm innocent, I didn't do any of this. Okay, well great, let's do a polygraph exam. Number one, if you hire a private polygraph examiner like myself, that is attorney work product. It is at zero risk of going over to the other side. So pass or fail, DA's not finding out unless you want them to find out. So if he comes in and he passes the polygraph, you're going to be on the phone with the DA going, hey, here's my state licensed polygraph examiner, member of the American Polygraph Association, highly respected individual, and they pass the polygraph. And that's going to signal to the DA, this guy's probably going to make a pretty good witness, because if he can pass a polygraph exam, which is not a relaxing situation, he's probably going to make a pretty good witness. And if I've got a he said, she said case, I have no fingerprints, I have no blood, I have no DNA, all I have is this conflicting eyewitness testimony, and they pass the polygraph exam, all of a sudden I'm going to realize I've got a problem with my case. I better go find some other stuff besides just this eyewitness testimony from one person. Now, if that person comes in and he fails, now you can remonstrate with your client. You can go, hey, that was my friendly polygraph examiner, and you just failed. How do you think you're going to do in an adversarial situation where you got the judge, you got the jury, you got the DA cross-examining you to the hilt? You're probably not going to do very well up on the stand there. And if you don't do well on the stand, we're going to lose our case. Now, they offered you a felony 3 plea agreement, which means you're only going away 1 to 5. If we go to trial, that plea agreement's off the table, you're looking felony 1, 15 to life. Are you sure you want to take this to trial? I mean, I'm your attorney, I'm going to represent you how you want me to, but maybe this is not the right decision for us to make here. Also, if you got Billy, only corroborating witness, say when we were hanging out playing Xbox and eating pizza, Billy's a former felon. He may be your only exculpatory witness, and if he fails the polygraph exam, again, you can talk to your client and go, hey, we got anybody else? Because this isn't looking so good from where I'm sitting here. I'm not going to ignore an exculpatory witness, but I certainly would like to have a lot stronger case to go in than somebody who can't pass a polygraph exam. All right, raffle. Lee and I talked about this just a little bit beforehand. I was the chapter president for the Federalist Society at the University of Idaho a couple of years ago. They took really good care of me. That's why I get to be here today. But Kaplan was the one who I was rep for, and so my company, Worldwide Polygraph Services, we're sponsoring a raffle today, and so whoever wins a raffle, I'm going to have 2 trivia questions for you. They're going to be law-related to polygraph, and if you had evidence, you better know this, and if you don't, you better go restudy your evidence. If you get both those questions right, then we're going to move on to Final Jeopardy with my demo guy here, and if he beats me on the demo, I'm going to pay for your bar review course. All right, so your front row, give me number 125. 22. 22. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 21, 22. Ray Hood. What year are you?
2 up.
2 up. You got evidence? No. Well, maybe I'll have to let you phone a friend on the first one here. All right, so what's the federal case that established the admissibility standard for expert scientific testimony, including polygraph?
Come on, Jake.
I've been taking evidence.
It's a softball.
All right, well,
No, you take it.
I'm asking the audience.
You're asking the audience. All right, so it sounds like his buddy's supposed to answer that for him.
Well, if I get it wrong, it's like relative. Howard?
No, that didn't establish it. All right, well, we'll move on to Starbucks gift card consolation prize.
Is it Fry?
It is Fry. Absolutely, well done. Fry, 19, back up, Sean. Fry's a 1923 case, and Mr. Fry wanted to admit evidence of a past polygraph exam. And the Supreme Court in 1923 said, you know, a polygraph does not meet generally scientifically accepted standards in its community. And in 1923, a polygraph consisted of a discontinuous measure of blood pressure. That was the only thing it was measuring. They'd ask you a question, you'd answer it, they'd pump up the cuff and take your systolic blood pressure, wait a minute, then they'd repeat the process. And that was the only thing they were measuring. And comparing a 1923 polygraph with a 2014 polygraph that's computerized, have 5 channels of input, is kind of like comparing a computer from the 1950s. It was as big as this room, had vacuum tubes, bugs were real things walking around, and then comparing it with your nice little Apple laptop there and saying, hey, they're both computers, they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. My father-in-law worked for Hewlett-Packard in the 1950s, and they had massive error rates, and if they'd have come up with a Supreme Court case to find out were computers valid and reliable, they wouldn't have passed the Fry test either. But, you know, that's kind of one of the problems we have with stare decisis in technology, is if you get it very early on in its infancy, and they haven't had 37 peer-reviewed studies that have been published to show here's how reliable it actually is at this point, you know, you get kind of stuck in that particular rut. All right, I'll throw this one out for you. What's the only state that polygraph is fully court admissible, case in chief, either side? All you have to do is lay good expert witness foundation the same way you would for, you know, doctors, etc. Any guess?
Utah.
California. Well, man, we wish it was California. We had huge state, tons of criminals. That'd be fantastic. Unfortunately not.
Alaska.
Alaska? Alaska's close. They're one step away from their state Supreme Court getting it admissible. They've had a couple justices that say it should be based on Daubert, but they aren't quite there yet. This one, their state legislature under their Rule 702 evidence said it's there.
Texas.
No, next door to Texas. New Mexico. New Mexico, it's fully court admissible. All you have to do is, again, lay just good expert foundation. And what's nice about New Mexico and having a small population, it means they've only got so many cases that are working through their system. And so we're going to be able to see real world what happens when polygraph is admitted in evidence and how it is impacting these particular cases. If we had California, we'd get this just dump of data that all of a sudden we'd have too much to be able to handle. So over the next 10 or 15 years with New Mexico, we'll get to see, is this being helpful, is it not, as we pull the juries? Are they just rubber stamping what the polygraph examiner says, or are they just using it, weighing it the way that they should be with their evidence as the finder of fact, or are they not? Okay, now, we talk about Fry, and we talk about Daubert. Daubert is now our federal standard, but those two are important as it relates to how states treat polygraph, because they're free to choose whether they're going to use the Fry test or whether they're going to use the Daubert standard in terms of how they're dealing with their evidence. And in these yellow Fry states, Polygraph is pretty much treated like fruit of the poisonous tree. If it's associated with polygraph, it's not going to be coming in. And so in Fry states, because the biggest law enforcement use of polygraph is getting confessions and then getting convictions off of those confessions, they have to alter the polygraph process slightly so that they can remove the taint that polygraph would have associated with it. So in Fry states, polygraph consists of 2 parts, and you have to have both parts in order to have a polygraph exam. First, you have a pre-test interview. And the pre-test interview is usually lasting 30 minutes to a couple of hours, depending on how much information that person is going to be giving you. And if you come in to take a polygraph, and during the pre-test interview you confess, no polygraph happened. We didn't put any components on, we didn't take any test measurements. You confessed during an interview with a law enforcement officer, therefore there is no taint from polygraph, and that confession's coming in. Now, if you don't confess during the pre-test interview, you take the polygraph exam, and the polygraph examiner scores it and realizes that person failed. Well, the polygraph examiner is not going to give them the results of the test. What's going to happen is a separate detective is going to come in, they're going to take that individual who took the polygraph to another office. They are going to sit there for 30 minutes to 2 hours, and then that other detective is going to come in and say, you failed your polygraph exam, anything you want to tell me? And if the person confesses in that post-test interrogation, well, there's been a separation of time, 30 minutes to 2 hours, a separation of location where you've been moved to a different office, and a separation of personnel. And those 3 things in combination with each other are enough to remove the taint of the polygraph exam, and that confession will now come in. Now in blue states, they're Daubert states, and you can confess whenever you like, and it's coming in. Fantastic. And the other nice thing about blue states is we have what are called pre-stipulated polygraph exams. Now, a pre-stipulated polygraph exam is where the DA says, if you come in it and you pass the polygraph, I'm going to drop the charges. If you come in and you fail, you're going to be required to accept a plea agreement. And if you renege on that agreement, then the polygraph is going to be fully court admissible. And the DA knows, if I have eyewitness testimony and a court admissible polygraph showing that you failed, I'm winning my case. Now, most of the time, DAs are only going to offer a pre-stipulated polygraph exam because they have a terrible case. They have no science. They've got no fingerprints. They've got no DNA. All they have is conflicting eyewitness testimony. They would not risk giving somebody a pass and a drop charge if they had any good science to go along with one eyewitness. Well, usually what happens as a private polygraph examiner, I get calls from defense attorneys who say, my guy just got offered a pre-stipulated polygraph exam. I'm not going to just send him over there to the wolves. I want to know if he's going to pass or not. So I give him the polygraph. And if he comes and he passes, he's on the phone 5 minutes later with the DA going, when can we take your super reliable polygraph exam? If the guy comes in and he fails, the defense attorney doesn't do anything. 3 or 4 weeks later, the DA calls him and says, hey, we offered you a pre-stipulated polygraph exam. When you coming? He's like, we're not taking your super unreliable polygraph. You go prove your case. And many times the DA will end up dropping the charges if they have offered a pre-stipulated polygraph exam and that person doesn't choose to come in. Because the DA has the obligation to only bring cases that they have a good faith belief that they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And if all they have is conflicting eyewitness testimony and nothing else, many times, especially in Utah, they're like, I don't have a case. I can't push this case forward. So I took my last swing at the fences. They decided not to come in and take the polygraph exam, so I guess I got to close up shop on this particular one. Okay, let's do our demonstration. Come on up, seat's all yours. The demonstration we're going to be doing here is what is called an acquaintance exam. This is the practice test we do before we're going to move on to a test that we're going to be scoring. It's also called a known lie exam, meaning if he follows instructions, we know that he's going to be lying somewhere on this test. But that's an important part of this test. I want to make sure his body reacts how I should expect it to before I'm going to move on to a test that I'm going to be scoring. Now the other thing he's going to do is he's going to give me 9 examples of what he looks like when he tells me the truth. Because by answering no every time on this test, he's only going to be able to lie once. I mean, he's only got 1 piece of paper, which means he's only got 1 number on this test, and so that'll be helpful for us. Now, I mentioned good polygraph at polygraph.org. Let's talk bad polygraph real quick. You can go to a site called antipolygraph.org. That's a site run by George Mashpee. He was a former CIA applicant. He apparently failed multiple polygraph exams, didn't get to be a G-man, and so he kind of made it his life's mission to help people to try and cheat on a polygraph exam and be able to pass. And he'll tell you things like put a tack in your shoe and step on it, wear rubber underwear, do a little sphincter squeeze, things that he thinks are going to help you pass a polygraph exam. And so that's one of the reasons why we have the motion sensor pad there on the chairs, to just make sure that that person's sitting still, make sure that they're following instructions. All right, now let's talk about results. On a polygraph exam, we got three major results we can get. We've got no deception indicated, meaning the person's being truthful. We have deception indicated, meaning the person is lying. And then we have what's called inconclusive. And as a polygraph examiner, I'm not here to guess. Either I have the data to support making a professional decision, or I don't. And sometimes people have things going on in their life that's more important than a polygraph exam we've got going on. I'll give you an example. We had a bank that had $4 million that had been embezzled from the bank. And so we had all the personnel in there who had access to the money and the vault where this was all taken from, that they were going to be taking polygraph exams, because that's a situation that is an exception to EPA, which is the Employee Polygraph Protection Act, which makes it so that you can't polygraph private employees without an identifiable loss and probable cause for that individual to have had access to that money. I'll identify there. So we had the bank vice president in there taking a polygraph exam, and he takes this test, you know, did you steal the missing $4 million? And he comes up as inconclusive. And in my experience, about 80% of the time when somebody comes up as inconclusive, they're lying. They're just not reacting strongly enough to be able to make that call. And so we ask him, all right, Mr. Bank Vice President, how do you not know whether you stole $4 million from your bank or not? He looks at me and says, you know, Brian, it's 10 to 1. 1:30, woman I've been having an affair with for the last 2 years is showing up on my doorstep, and if I'm not home, she's talking to my wife. It takes me 30 minutes to get home. Can I leave now? Go home. Go home. He goes home, he comes back 2 days later, and he passes the polygraph with flying colors. The fact that his 2-year affair is about to blow up in his face was more important than $4 million missing from his bank. Sometimes people have things going on that are more important. You know, somebody just had a close family member die in the last couple of weeks. That's not a good time to take a polygraph. They're grieving. Somebody just had a car accident. They got whiplash. They're in physical pain. We can always wait weeks, if not months, to give somebody a polygraph to make sure that they are both physically and mentally in the right frame of mind to be able to take a polygraph exam. Okay, so like I said, just a little bit. He's got a number on a piece of paper. What I'm going to ask him is, regarding the number written on the piece of paper in your pocket, is it the number? And we're going to go in order on a list, 1 through 10. I've instructed him to answer no every single time for me, which means one of these times he's going to have to be lying. And we'll see how good he is at lying. We'll see how good you guys are at identifying where it is that he's lying. Now, as you look at the lines here, and you'll get to see these in a minute after we're done, the blue lines are respiration lines, the chest and abdomen there. The green line is the electrodermal activity finger plates. The red line is the cardio cuff. And what we're going to be looking for is relative changes. I don't have some baseline number that says as soon as his heart rate reaches 80 beats per minute, he's lying. His resting heart rate might be 80 beats per minute. I'm looking for relative changes on this particular test. And then the black line's a motion sensor pad. You'll just pick your right foot up and put it down for me. Perfect. You see how we got that nice big spike there. If we see those kinds of things, then we know he's not sitting still. He's not doing the things he should be on this test. Okay. Now, this test is going to take about 3 minutes. And you, as the human jury, just like anybody else who's sitting there in a trial, is going to have to listen to his answers. And we'll see how good you are at being able to identify where he is lying and where he's not. And if you want to use this as an assist, that's great. But think about what juries have to deal with, and all they get to hear is his testimony, and that's it. And we'll see how good you guys are at that. Oh yeah, we have to make sure this is important to him, so I didn't tell him this, but I got a C note in my wallet. If I don't get what number you got, that C note's yours. Oh, nice. All right?
Now I'm really excited.
Now he's nervous. Awesome. He thought he was off the hook when we didn't have a bar review, but got to make sure he's personally invested here. All right. Looks good. Please remain still. The test is about to begin. Regarding the number written on the piece of paper in your pocket, is it the number 1?
No.
Is it the number 2?
No.
Is it the number 3?
No.
Is it the number 4?
No.
Is it the number 5?
No.
Is it the number 6?
No.
Is it the number 7?
No.
Is it the number 8?
No.
Is it the number 9?
No.
Is it the number 10?
No.
This test is now over. Please remain still while I take the instrument out of operation. You can relax. Okay, now normally when I run this test, I'm going to run it 3 times. I'm going to run it forward, 1 through 10. I'm going to run it backward, 10 through 1. And then I'm going to run it in random order. And we know when we first start a test, we're always going to get some reactions. It's called an orienting response. People are getting put under pressure. And so we don't want the first couple of numbers that we ask about to be the possible number that he would be lying to. So the numbers 1 and 2 were not possible numbers that he had. All right, that's great job. The numbers 9 and 10 were not possible numbers because we're going to be running this test backwards. So the only possible numbers that he had on this test were the numbers 3 through 8. And as you look at this, there are going to be a couple times where you see some blue arrows, like right here. That blue arrow is me recentering the tracing. That is not a reaction on his part. If you've seen like the old analog pens and paper polygraph, like Meet the Parents kinds of things, when the pen hits the bottom of the paper, it stops recording data. With a computerized polygraph, I could let this go anywhere on the charts and I'd be able to just look it up and move it around and be able to see what those tracings were looking like. So as you look at the numbers 3 through 8 here, don't look at that blue arrow moving it up there right after 3. Don't look at that and go, wow, that's a big reaction. That's not that. That's me recentering. Okay, so trier of fact. What number was he lying to? How many think it was number 3? How many think it was number 4? How many think it was number 5? How many think it was number 6? Number 7? Number 8? All right, well, if I was doing Ask the Audience with their big vote, I'd be losing my $100. But there are a bunch of people I think they got it right too. My $100 is on number 5.
Yep.
All right, number 5. Let's talk about why it was number 5. This test is called a known lie test, meaning we know he's lying somewhere on the test. But it's also called a peak of tension test. He knew exactly where he was going to be lying on this test. He knew the order that the questions were going to be coming in. And so up until the point that he lies, he is getting under greater and greater stress till he lies, and then after that, he knows that I get to be truthful the whole rest of the time, and that stress and tension goes away. And so if we look at his heart rate right here, as soon as he answers number 4, he realizes, I'm lying on the next one. Look at his heart rate go up, up, up. And then as soon as he tells the truth, or lies at number 5, look at that, it goes all the way down and eventually falls off the page. Total relaxation. You look here at his respiration. We had some nice normal breathing, and all of a sudden, for about 25 seconds, it's like getting punched in the gut. He knows he's lying, and all of a sudden he's got this big constricted breathing, and we got a problem here. Now, his electrodermal, that didn't give me a whole lot, but that's one of the reasons why we have so many channels of input, is everybody physiologically reacts a little bit differently. But when I take those in combination, that allows me to go, his body reacts in some very prototypical ways. I can now move on to that test of did he rob the First National Bank on January 2nd and know if he reacts the way that prototypical liars do, I know I got my guy. If he reacts the way that prototypical people who are telling the truth on this test do, I know I don't have my guy and I need to move on to somebody else. But what's nice is after having properly identified number 5 for him, he realizes if I'm the innocent guy, Brian just saw that 9 times I was telling the truth, I'm in great shape. And they passed no problem. If he's the guy who did rob the bank, he realizes, I just caught you lying about a number on a piece of paper. How do you think you're going to do when I ask you, did you rob the First National Bank? And you did. They realize they're screwed. And I get a whole bunch of confessions right after this test, before I even run the test. Did you rob the First National Bank? Because they know there's no way I'm getting by this. I don't want to sit here with these components on any longer. And the best way to make that happen is I confess and we get moving on to something else. And so that's a great thing. Okay, now, just a couple more quick things. I'll make sure you're out of here pretty fast. But you as future attorneys are going to have to make arguments. And very few things are very black and white in the legal system. But you're going to be trying to present evidence. And as you think about tests, and tests that you want to take and present as evidence in trial, how accurate do you think a test should be before you would be willing to allow it in as evidence in a trial? Okay, so let's start with our basic preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not, our civil standard, 51%. How many think a test that is 51% accurate should be allowed in as evidence in a trial? Good, none of you. That's flipping a coin. That's flipping a coin. All right? How many of you think a test has to be 70% accurate or more and you're fine? You let any test that's 70% accurate or more come in?
As long as the accuracy is explained to the jury.
Okay? All right, we got one. Everybody else says no. All right, let's talk about 90%. If a test is not 90% accurate or more, how many of you want to keep it out? So anybody who's not raising their hand is okay with a test that's less than 90% accurate. If a test is 90% or more, it comes in. If it's less than 90%, it's staying out. Okay, that's most of you. All right. So when you look at that and what's coming in, all of you who said a test that's not 90% accurate doesn't come in, you just eliminated every psychological exam that's out there. You eliminated x-rays, CT scans, MRIs. Those aren't coming in. I had 3 teenage boys and a whole bunch of sports, and we were in the x-ray room every other month. And there were times where the radiologist would look and go, yeah, he's got a broken bone. I'm like, yeah, it's a displaced fracture. Any idiot can see that. And then there were times where he'd look at it and go, you know what? I can't tell. Based on the pain that they're reporting, he's probably got a fracture. But if I had to put him on the stand and have him testify to a medical certainty, he wouldn't have been able to do it. No, those tests are only high 80% accuracy. And we regularly hear psychological testing coming in all the time. Competency hearings, you'll have 5 experts who get up on the stand and say, this person is absolutely competent to stand trial. You'll have 5 other experts who look at the exact same test, the exact same answers, and they say, this guy's loony as a bird. You got this battle of the experts going on here. Same thing happens with all this medical malpractice and those things going on. You're going to hear these medical experts get up there and say, yep, he did this, he did that, these are the tests they use, all those things. But these tests, again, are only in the high 80% accuracy. So if we're looking at polygraphs, specific issue, 37 peer-reviewed studies, overall 88% accuracy on those tests. Other than New Mexico, without pre-stipulation, we've only got 1 state that's allowing polygraph in at this point. It has nothing to do with Fry in terms of its accuracy or generally accepted in its scientific community at this point. It's other things that are keeping it out. So what do you guys think is keeping polygraph out, or would be your argument for keeping polygraph out if it's more accurate than all these other tests that we are allowing in?
When's the last time you imprisoned somebody based on their X-ray?
Sorry, it's been.
When's the last time you imprisoned somebody based on their X-ray?
Well, I would say you have a doctor who's being accused of killing somebody and misusing a particular test. You're going to be looking at incarceration for that individual. Now, is it common? No, it's not. But there are absolutely going to be circumstances where you could be determining somebody's liberty interest based on their use or purposeful, or incompetency, so that we're attaching criminal blame, not just monetary blame to what's going on there. But yeah, I'd say that's probably a reasonable example for that, for sure.
Is it the Fifth Amendment?
Well, it's not Fifth Amendment. I mean, when you come in to take a polygraph exam, unless you're on probation, we ask you to come in. If you come in voluntarily, that means you're not in custody. And if you're not in custody, that means Miranda's not implicated. So if you come in and take a polygraph and you confess, you can't go, they violated my Miranda rights, therefore shouldn't come in. Sorry. I got a court case like 4 slides later that's out of Georgia that specifically says when you come in and take a polygraph, you're not required to have Miranda, and we're going to admit that, certainly. Idaho, it says this is a 403 issue. It's more prejudicial than it is probative. They're concerned that if the jury hears they failed a polygraph exam, they're just going to rubber stamp it, send it on its way, and move it forward. Well, I mean, if we're going to trust juries to hear complex DNA analysis, fingerprint swirl analysis, all of these different types of things, you're telling me we can't tell them, hey, polygraph's not perfect, it's this accurate, but now you've got a known margin of error. Can't you just take this and weigh it accordingly? I mean, I guess the other thing you look at is when I did my Juris Doctorate, my specialization was litigation and dispute resolution. We had to look at the composition of juries. And juries are not a jury of our peers at this point. You don't see doctors and lawyers and dentists and people with advanced degrees sitting on juries. If they're smart enough to have an advanced degree, they're smart enough to get out of jury service. They're not getting paid $50 a day to go sit up there. What you see sitting on juries is retired people, government employees, and Billy Bob from the trailer park. Who do you want determining your liberty interests? You want somebody who's going to fall asleep, somebody who's worried about getting back to deliver the mail, or somebody who passed high school because their football coach like them? I would much rather have a couple hundred different polygraph examiners determining my liberty interests than the people that I see sitting on our typical juries. That's the argument to be made. Now, if you're a defense attorney and you've got a guy who's taken a polygraph exam and he's passed, don't you want to be able to present that evidence? Your opportunity to present a fair and full defense? By saying polygraph's not admissible, you just eliminated one of your defense tools and one of your defense capabilities. In a lot of these states, it's not coming in without that pre-stipulation. Then you look at character for truthfulness evidence. I have my buddy who I've known for 20 years. He gets up there on the stand and says, I know Brian, his character for truthfulness is impeccable. But when that happens, then it opens the door up for the prosecution to present these specific incidents of a bad act. They're going, oh, did you know Brian cheated on his LSAT and those things? They're like, oh, well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But at least if you're on the defense side of things, the argument to be able to, hey, I got a polygraph, I passed it, I'm going to open it up for scrutiny on the prosecution side of things. They can bring their own expert and be able to move that particular route. Certainly there's an argument to be made there. And as we have New Mexico, again, as a real live test case state, to be able to see what happens, maybe we start seeing some of these changes that allow different arguments to be able to be made through. All right, last case, and then I'll let you go here. This case, very recent, 2012. And in Idaho, we don't have state licensing, unfortunately. The idiot polygraph examiner from the Boise Police Department brought this guy in to do a polygraph exam. We've all heard that law enforcement is perfectly allowed to lie to people in their investigations. Low-level trickery and all those things are just fine to get a confession. So if Jimmy's there to take a polygraph exam or those things, and they say, hey, by the way, your buddy Billy, the guy, he got the Xbox games and everything, he's in here confessing right now, and if you don't confess, he's getting a deal, and you're going away for a long time. And all of a sudden, Jimmy breaks and he confesses. And the fact that Billy wasn't even in the other room, they never even talked to Billy, doesn't matter. That confession is absolutely going to stick. Now, the Boise police examiner had this guy in there to take a polygraph on a sex offense. And in almost every sex offense, you could probably slap down 6 to 8 felony 1 charges, because if they touch their breast, they touch their buttocks, they touch their vagina, all in one incident, that's 3 separate felony 1 charges. All right, well, he brings him in here to do the polygraph exam, and he tells the guy he failed the test. And he says, I am going to testify at trial that you failed the test and that polygraph 100% accurate. All right, well, that's line number 1. Oh, actually 2 lies there. He's not testifying at trial. We're not in New Mexico. And of course, polygraph's not 100% accurate. If you have a polygraph examiner tell you it's that, you need a new polygraph examiner. And then he says, and we're going to add 3 more felony 1 charges, so you'll be looking at 125 years of incarceration in the state of Idaho. And then we're going to slap on another one where we're going to have a felony charge of lying to law enforcement. Well, at this point, this guy caved and he confessed. And Idaho Court of Appeals said, you know what? When you tell them you're going to testify at trial, the polygraph's 100% perfect, you're going to add 3 more felony charges, and then you're going to add this lying to law enforcement, you just violated that guy's rights. You coerced that confession. Nobody's going to be able to stand up to that level of pressure. And they tossed the confession and tossed his conviction. Why is that important in Pennsylvania? Well, one of the things you see that I've got computerized, I got audio and video. And I've had that running since the time that we started. And a good polygraph examiner is going to have audio and video of the entire process that that individual has gone through from before the time that he walked in. You'll see I've got 1 hour and 9 minutes of video up there. From the time before he walked in, during the entire pre-test interview, during the entire in-test phase, during the entire post-test interrogation in an unbroken chain. So you can demonstrate, I did not do the things that they were accusing me of doing, saying I'm going to put all this additional pressure on there. So the first thing I would do if I were a defense attorney or if I were a prosecutor, I'd say, okay, I'm glad you got this confession. I want the audio and video of the entire polygraph that you just did on that guy. Because if you cannot produce that, any smart defense attorney is going to argue this state precedent in Idaho, and if I were a DA, I'd be scared to death about somebody presenting another state's precedent-setting, this is how much lying you can do, and if you get to this point, you violated their rights, you're going to start losing a whole bunch of cases. Now in Utah, being a state licensed examiner, I have to carry $2 million of professional liability insurance or I don't get work. I don't ever want to have anybody question whether I did things exactly by the book every single time. So hopefully what this is going to do is it's going to encourage polygraph examiners, especially in non-licensing states that don't have the threat of losing their state license the way I do in Utah if you don't follow good standards, to start following that, because the DA and the police departments are going to look stupid if you don't have the audio and video showing that you didn't violate their rights. Okay, well, any questions that you guys have?
Just quickly, so this test you did depended, it seemed like, at least in part, on him being able to anticipate when he was going to be lying.
Oh,
So
yeah, he was absolutely going to be able to anticipate where he was going to be lying in this one. That's why it's called peak attention.
So how does that work in a test where, for example, they don't know the order of the questions.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not looking for the exact same kind of reactions where it's going to peak and relax the way that it did here. What I'm going to be looking for is when people are lying, they realize that there's a negative consequence associated with them if they get caught lying. All right? And so it's called the fight, flight, or freeze response to a dangerous situation. So when people get into danger, they're going to have primal human responses. We're going to see faster heart rate, increase in blood pressure, we're going to see faster, shallower breathing, and we're going to see preemptive activation of their sweat glands. And so with this, I'm able to see he's absolutely able to produce reactions that are visible for me to be able to see. And then when I move on to those next test questions, instead of seeing that anticipatory rise that we saw after we saw number 4, before we got to number 5, and then the relaxation after it, I am only going to see the increase in blood pressure in those reactions after I've asked the question that he knows he's lying to. All the questions are going to be pre-reviewed with that individual. There are no surprise questions on a polygraph exam, but if he is going to be lying on a test, he's going to know exactly what questions he's going to be lying to. You know, if you robbed the First National Bank, he knows when I ask, did you rob the First National Bank, he's lying to that. And as soon as I ask that question, I'm going to get significant responses off of that. The purpose of this test is just make sure that he will have some changes in his body when he is telling a lie.
How much danger do you face in your job?
How much danger do I face in my job? Very well, I guess it depends on who I'm testing, what I'm testing for. When I'm dealing with post-conviction sex offenders, and that's probably about 95% of the testing that I do, they're on probation or parole. Their PO knows that they're coming to take a test from me. Many times I'm in a controlled setting where I'm in a halfway house, where they're in lockdown, and I'm on the lockdown side of things to do their testing. Other times I'm in my office or at a therapist's office. I've never had any issue where I have felt unsafe in doing a polygraph exam in that particular setting. Now, when I'm doing fidelity testing, if I got to find out if somebody's significant other is not doing the things that they should be, you know, I've certainly had maybe some other situations that were a little bit more anticipatory, but again, I've never felt unsafe. But Utah's got 34 states of reciprocity on the conceal and carry, so I haven't had too many issues with that.
I'm just curious about the stat that's, I don't remember the number, 99% effective.
Oh, the test on the top?
Yeah. What is that?
CIT.
So what does it mean to say that it is accurate?
99.84% accurate.
Yeah. What does the word accurate mean? I'm just curious.
Accuracy as its ability to appropriately diagnose what it is meant to diagnose. So with polygraph, we are trying to diagnose whether somebody's being truthful or not. With the X-ray, we're trying to diagnose, do they have a broken bone or not? With the CT, you know, a tear in soft tissue. With psychological tests, it's, well, are they this psychological diagnosis or not? The CIT test is a little bit different. It's a polygraph test, but it's not your standard polygraph test where we're answering yes or no on questions. The CIT test is one where we are gauging somebody's guilty knowledge and intimate knowledge that only a guilty person would know and an innocent person would not know. And it kind of gets into some math. It'll probably take me about 10 minutes to explain. So if you want to stay after, I'll explain it to you. But yeah, it's about 99.84% accurate when we just look at the statistical numbers that go with it and the probability that an innocent person is going to randomly react to those questions.
So when you say it's 98% accurate, that says something about it's accurate at telling if someone's lying. You're not saying the instruments are 98% accurate or something like that.
No. When we look at the measurements that we are getting, we are 99.84% accurate at diagnosing whether they have intimate knowledge or not.
One last question for you. In 60 seconds or less, when somebody comments on your presentation, what is the most effective or most common argument that people use against the polygraph as a...
The most effective argument is that